Welcome to the First Mentor podcast. Here, you will hear us talk about a variety of topics for the entire family that will hopefully spark a discussion, create a new curiosity, or simply teach you something new. The goal is to inspire you to learn life skills and soft skills not taught in school and prepare you to live an extraordinary life. Come on and spend some time with us on your commute to school or anytime you're free.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 24 of the First Mentor podcast. And this is your host and mentor, Vanessa Yang. And today I have invited Terry Chuah to talk with us about soft skills that we all need to reach executive level and success in life. Because many times when we are younger, we often start with a fairly empty toolbox. What skills or tools do we need to acquire on our way to career success to fill that box? And how do we even know what kind of box we have? And how can we find out what career is suitable for us and what will make us feel happy? With over 20 years of experience in executive search with top-tier companies all over the world, and now as the founder of the Career Life Cycle, coaching senior-level clients to realize their life and professional aspirations, Terry will help us answer some of these very important questions. And I just wanted to tell you, you might want to get ready to take some notes because there's so many golden nuggets of advice throughout this entire episode that very successful people pay a lot of money to learn. And also remember to subscribe to the First Mentor podcast to not miss out on future life-changing episodes. And also share with your friends and family who can benefit from building the foundation for a rewarding, successful, and happy life. And without further delay, here's our interview with Terry Chuah. And I would like to welcome our guest, Terry Chuah, to our show today. And he has been very special to me. I met him several years ago. I don't even know, 10 years ago. And we've been keeping in touch here and there. So welcome to the show, Terry.
Thank you, Vanessa. It's great to be with you.
Yes, I'm excited that we can talk because I know I always learned great little nuggets from you, and I'm excited to hear what you can share with our listeners. So to bring everybody a little bit up to speed, can you start with maybe sharing with our listeners a little bit more about your background? And one particular thing I would be interested in is is there one particular event in your life that really shaped who you've become today?
Sure. Thanks, Vanessa. In terms of background, today I am running a consulting firm where I do mainly three things, right? I do a lot of coaching of executives, and these typically are senior executives. So these are CEOs and C-suite people. Second thing I do is what you might call leadership assessment. And leadership assessment is conducted on executives who are going to be joining a particular company. And so either the company itself or the investors in the company are interested in the personality, in the leadership style of the individuals that they're thinking of hiring. So I conduct an assessment in terms of, how these folks are likely to behave, their strengths, and perhaps, some of their weaknesses and so forth. And the third thing I do, Vanessa, is what you might call career coaching.
Yes.
Right? So this is about helping people understand where it is that they would really like to take their career.
Yeah.
And because I had spent, a good 20 years of my career in executive search, I understand what it takes to get to the kind of roles that you aspire to, and the sort of development and the sort of presentation skills sometimes that might be useful so that you can become a serious candidate for those roles that you're really interested in. So those are the things that I do through my firm these days.
Yeah, and those are really exciting, I think, at least personally. And before we dive deeper in a lot of discussion, I just want to lay the groundwork and make sure for some of our maybe younger listeners that they fully understand what we're talking about. So you mentioned C-suite earlier and a little bit about executives. And can you maybe just explain very basically for them what that means?
Sure. So let's take an example, right? So if you think about an organization like, let's say, Microsoft,
Mhm.
right? Now, Microsoft has meaning for a lot of people. Microsoft is one of the world's largest companies. It's
Mhm.
obviously one of the world's largest tech companies. Now, for companies like that to operate, you need leadership. And the way that organizations work is where you have somebody who leads the organization. And that typically is somebody that you might call the CEO or the chief executive officer.
Yes.
Now, because people can't do everything by themselves, they need a team of people. And
Mm.
so what happens typically is that a CEO might have anywhere between 6 or 7 to 10, 12, 15 direct reports.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And these folks then manage a bunch of other people who then manage a bunch of other people
Yeah.
and so forth. And that's typically how you have an organization that is led by particular types of structures that make sure that the organization is run properly and that the services that it provides continue and so forth. So that's what the senior folks in those organizations do. They have a level of responsibility, and typically each has a very clear set of responsibilities
Yes.
that that they fulfill. There are two aspects at least to this, right? I mean, why would anybody want to be a senior executive? Well, typically there are two reasons. One is that there are people out there who really love being in a leadership position.
Mhm.
They love to organize people. They love to make sure that people and other resources are managed in such a way that it creates a great result, right,
Yes.
for the people involved and for the organization and so forth. Now, the other thing also is that very often, the more senior you rise through an organization, the more you are compensated
Yeah,
for that level of
absolutely.
responsibility. Typically, to discharge that level of responsibility, you need a set of skills. All right. So skills twofold generally. They have to do with technical skills, but they
Yeah,
also have to do with people skills or leadership
absolutely.
skills. And
Mhm.
so the combination of these things then, allow for executives to successfully discharge their responsibilities. It's not necessarily for everybody, but there are many people out there who are attracted, as you were at one time, part of a
Yes,
large
I was.
organization, where it's kind of fun, right, to be a part of a larger organization, and then you're part of a larger purpose.
Mhm.
And it's just fun interacting with a whole bunch of different people, feeling that you're part of something much bigger than yourself.
Yes, yes. And I know you met so many different senior executives and people who've had lots of years of experience, right? When you think back kind of across all those, are there any common themes or common traits that you have observed for them to be able to reach that level?
Yeah, absolutely. By and large, people who run large organizations, whether at the CEO level, right at the top, or whether it's at the next level or even the next level down, typically, people rise to those levels, those senior levels, because they have a set of skills.
Mhm.
And these skills typically fall into two categories, right? One is that obviously they have a level of technical skill. It
Yeah.
could be an industry related set of skills. It could be a functional skill. So, for instance, somebody could be a chief financial officer, where their skill obviously has to do with finance
Yeah.
and the ability to understand, the financial resources that it takes to get a company from A to B.
Yeah.
Or the function could be, let's say, marketing, or
Mhm.
it could be sales, or it could be engineering, right? And so typically these are the functions at the next level that people specialize in.
Yes.
And generally the CEO or somebody who runs an organization is not a specialist just in one function or
Mhm.
another. And generally you call them general managers because they have the ability to understand the different functions that are needed in a large organization. And the larger organization, typically, the more complex the organization. So the ability to understand all of these things and be able to integrate them and work with them in such a way that you give direction to the overall company
Yes.
is a skill that you practice at the most senior level. So there are range of skills that you need to be able to to do what you do well.
I know it's really challenging, right? As people as they grow up, and I know Gen Zs are either just about to start and enter their career, for them to prepare, right? Something that could be applied at no matter what job comes in the future. And I even read many times, by the time they grow up, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, maybe, or just the next generation of the working force, those jobs have not been invented yet, right? So what skill sets do you think is really important for them to prepare to be successful in their life, in their career,
Mm.
not knowing what they want to become, not knowing what future jobs there might be, and so on and so forth?
That's a really good question. It's a very complex question. Let's kind of break it
Yes,
down
let's break
in
it down.
parts and deal with that. Now, your question before was, what is it that's common, across successful leaders?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you need technical skills, but very often the most successful leaders are the ones who have what you just referred to as soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
And soft skills are about the ability to connect with people. It's about the ability to understand people, where they're coming from, the ability to give people a reason why they should follow you,
Yes.
why they should listen to the ideas that you might have. And the thing is like this, right? In life, there are many decisions that you can make about many problems that come up. And very often it's difficult to tell whether one particular direction is that much better than the other.
Yeah.
And leadership is about making judgments about what you feel might be the best direction to take, all things considered.
Right. Yeah.
Now,
Knowing what you know at that point in time.
exactly. But also very often knowing what you don't know. And that
Yeah.
sometimes is
Exactly.
just as important. Now, having figured that out, then the question is, hey, I know I've got the best path forward. How do I convince a bunch of people over here that they should follow me?
Yeah.
And so the ability to understand what it is that, people need in order to be able to convince themselves that they should follow you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, this is a part of what you might broadly call influencing skills, right? And it doesn't really matter what role you're in. It doesn't matter what function you're in.
Mm-hmm.
The chief financial officer, as much as the chief marketing officer, as much as the chief engineer or the chief technical officer or technology officer, all need to have a level of influencing skills. Because
Mm-hmm.
without those, honestly, you may have the best solution, but if you can't convince anyone that is the best solution, you know
Yes.
what? It doesn't really matter. So that combination between being somebody who is respected because of your knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
because of your wisdom, you also need to have the other set of, broadly speaking, you can call them interpersonal skills, you can call
Yeah.
them influencing skills. You could even call them sales skills because you do need to sell people on certain ideas.
Absolutely.
And so
Absolutely.
that aspect of it is really important. Now, it doesn't mean that, we need to rush out tomorrow and take a sales course. Very often, what this comes down to is that there are some people who are born with stronger
Yeah.
influencing
Mm-hmm.
skills than
Mm-hmm.
others because of personality,
Yeah.
right? And the great thing about people is that, people have personalities. Everybody's different. By and large, you have, people who generally tend to be stronger in certain sets of skills than others.
Mm-hmm.
And generally splits up into 50-50 of the population. Now, there are people who are born naturally and they're gifted with influencing skills.
Yeah.
And there are people who may not be because they have stronger skills in other areas, right? So somebody might have, let's say, stronger analytical skills,
Mm-hmm.
but relatively less influencing skills. And so if that's the case, then over time, you probably want to uh, make sure that you do develop a certain set of interpersonal skills in order to be more effective in
Yes.
convincing your peers and others to your way of thinking. So that's always important. The question is, hey, at what time should we think about
Yes.
developing and strengthening those skills? And there is no one answer. A lot of that kind of depends on personal interest and where you are and how supportive your parents might be, etc.
Mm-hmm. I know when I was kind of moving up in corporate America and I was trying to mentor and coach my staff, there was always the perception of, well, I have to have a certain title first before I can influence, right? Or I have to be at least a manager or somebody under me so I can have a say or the authority. But many times, as I've learned, you can start without a title or without authority, and even in your younger years to practice, because a lot of skills, like you said, some are lucky and born with it, but those who are not doesn't mean they just have to throw the towel and give up. Those are skill sets you can learn and practice even while you're in school. Leadership position, right? I mean, become active in clubs, take an initiative, don't just wait and sit passively, but really think about something and go out there and do it. If a club doesn't exist that you're interested in where you want to be the leader, then create it yourself, right? Those are the things that I always feel that are really important. It's like initiative taking.
That there's absolutely no doubt about that, right? So there's a very simple kind of rule in life that goes like this: there's never the wrong time to do the right thing. So
Yeah,
could be a right thing. A good thing to do, no matter when, no matter what, no matter where you are, is developing a way of interacting with whoever you're with, right?
mm-hmm.
It
Yeah,
could be a sibling, it could be a parent,
yeah,
right? It could be an aunt, right? It could be a cousin.
yes,
The willingness to engage with whoever it is that you're with, and the developing a sensitivity towards what it is that you're trying to do with that individual. If you're trying to say, hey guys, this afternoon, I have a really good idea as to what I think we could do,
mm-hmm.
as a family or whatever. And, it'd be kind of nice if we could, you know, think about doing this because number one, it'd be fun. Number two, give us a little bit of exercise or whatever it is,
Yeah,
right?
bike
So
riding. That's what we've been trying to do.
like writing, right?
Yes.
And so, very often what happens is that it's the parents who suggest that it's a good idea, as
Yeah.
opposed to the kids who say, "Hey, listen, I think that'll be a nice idea," and as opposed
Exactly.
to saying, because I want to, it must be the right idea. If you think about interacting with people and giving people a choice
Mm-hmm.
and developing a number of different options, that's when you start to practice in a very small way leadership,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And it's leadership about being inclusive, right?
Yes.
Inviting
Mm-hmm.
other ideas. It's leadership in terms of, being able to conduct a set of discussions and conversations amongst a group of people, in a very friendly, convivial way. And then it's about taking that group then, and it doesn't have to be like a big deal, right?
Yeah.
But sort of, having a mindset that says, hey, there's a number of different opportunities here. What do we think as a group is a good option for us to all agree on? Now, as you kind of go through those steps as a parent, then, if you look at it from the viewpoint of a parent, to be able to role model
Yes. Very important.
that type of approach to problem solving,
Mm-hmm.
and if you like, developing consensus, right? It's a really nice way for kids to watch how parents are doing it, but also for parents to then involve their kids so that, these are life skills over time,
Absolutely.
whereby, you practice them, through high school, and you practice them through college days. And for sure, you practice them then immediately from the first day you start work, right?
Yes. Yes.
So I would say, that could be, a good way of thinking about
Yeah.
how you start developing these skills.
Years ago, I watched an episode of Super Nanny. I don't know if you ever saw that show, but it's this woman who goes into families apparently where the kids are
Oh,
fighting,
yeah,
never
yeah, yeah.
listening, and
Okay.
trouble.
Yeah.
But one lesson that kind of stuck with me is always talk to your children in their currency, what they care about. So if they care about toys, then speak to them in terms of toys because money doesn't mean anything for them. Or if it's the teens are older, right? Their time on their electronic devices, on their phone or whatever that might be. And I thought that was really interesting concept to reward them and think about ways that matter to them. So just like as a leader, you can't just impose your point of view. This is where I am and this is what I'm thinking. And so everybody must think the same thing. But when you flip it around, that person might care about something completely different, right? To see it from that point of view. But also, you mentioned mindset earlier. And I think mindset is so important, how you think about certain things. When I was younger and growing up, I got frustrated easily when things didn't go my way too. But eventually, I learned that I should always focus on what I can control. You said a few things. Problem solving is also important, right? Especially, I feel like with some of the younger generation, lucky or not lucky for them, that parents are now, I guess, more educated and have a little bit more time and understanding to take care of them. But at the same time, there has to be a fine balance, because otherwise they can't go out to the real world and solve problems themselves.
People used to say that a lot of things start at home in terms of, either the relationship you have with your children or what it is that you
Yes.
teach your children, or how you encourage them to behave and create the basis of a mindset in certain ways. Now, there were two words that you just used. One is mindset, and the other, it kind of relates to the practice of what broadly is known as positive psychology. And it goes like this. In life, there will always be problems.
Mhm.
In life, sometimes problems hit you. The question is, do you choose to be a victim,
Yeah.
or do you choose to do something about it?
Mhm.
Now, if you choose to be a victim, then it becomes, woe is me, poor me, why did it happen to me? So, then it's not my fault, etc. So let's focus on what it is that we can do, and not focus on the self-pity. And that is a very fundamental, basic lesson in life that I think gets reflected later on in life at work when you're faced with a complex problem. How do you deal with that?
Yes.
Right? Do you focus on what it's going to take to solve the problem, or do you focus on your immediate kind of psychological needs, which
Yeah.
may not be that warranted? So if you focus a little bit too much on yourself, you're not going to solve the problem, which means that if the problem doesn't get solved, you're not doing as good a job as you could.
Very, very
If you're
true.
not, then you're probably not going to rise to the next level when the time comes, right? As it is in life, at work, you get rewarded for the ability to problem solve.
Yeah.
You get rewarded for the impact that you make in leading people through to bigger and better solutions.
So true.
Now,
Yes.
the other thing is mindset. Mindset is a big deal. I think there's only one thing that parents and kids equally should probably think about, and it doesn't matter whether ultimately they turn out to be an executive or a leader or a CEO, or they're very happy being a professional. And a professional is a doctor or a dentist or a lawyer or accountant or whatever. Or if you're a software programmer or a developer, right? It doesn't matter. But what's important in life is to develop and maintain a growth mindset.
Yes.
So what's a growth mindset? For folks who are interested in reading, there is a Stanford professor who wrote a book called The Growth Mindset,
I think I've heard about that.
right? And Carol Dweck is her name. And if there's one thing that parents can do, if there's only one thing that parents can do, if they think about and they worry about, hey, am I doing the best for my child? And so
Yes.
if there's only one thing they do, it should be to read that book. Why? Well, it goes like this. And I think one of the questions that you're interested in is, hey, what is it that Gen Z can do or should focus on? It is about developing a growth mindset that says, you know what, I want to learn as much as I possibly can, because the knowledge that I have today is nowhere near enough for me to survive and thrive into the future.
Yes.
So what I do know today is not nearly enough. And oh, by the way, I need to try as much as I can. And in a sense, have developed a humility that says, yes, I know a lot already, but you know what? That's actually not enough. In fact, I'm going to really
Humility is
enjoy,
important.
right? Humility is important, right? And I like to hear why you think humility is important, because it turns out that it's actually a key secret ingredient
Yeah.
to a lot of successful people. Because if you think you know it all, if you think you're the smartest guy in the room, especially parents who keep telling the kids that their kids are the smartest kids in the world,
Yes.
is the worst thing they can
Mhm.
possibly do for their children, right? Now, it turns out that for a lot of Asian parents, and because of the cultural history, Asian parents generally are not happy, no matter how much work their
Oh my
kids do.
God. Yes. Tell me about that.
No, turns out that's actually not a bad thing. In fact, it's actually a good thing. And the reason is this. The reason is that when you reward people, and kids in particular, on the basis of their effort, they actually end up doing a whole lot better.
Hmm.
Whereas if you reward children and say, oh, you're such a smart kid, well, guess what? The smart kid ain't going to do nothing to show that he's not smart.
Yes.
And so
Very
what
true.
happens then is that they actually protect the little bit of knowledge they have. They actually won't grow. And if you don't grow your body of knowledge, particularly in the world going forward, in the post-COVID world, in a world of uncertainty, in a world where, it's about the gig economy, where fewer people are going to be employed by companies. You're out on your own. So who do you think is going to be really responsible for your own development?
Yeah. Yourself.
Guess what? Yourself. That's a fundamental reason why developing a growth mindset is a really good thing to do.
Yeah. I'm going to answer your question about humility.
Yeah.
What I've learned is I kind of observe, and you're so right. If kids grow up being praised all the time, they're the best. I've seen this in my kids sometimes too. It's like they go into, or even myself, like if it's a particular topic, sometimes you go into and you're saying, I don't need to really pay attention. I already know this. But I've learned to switch that mindset around a little bit to say, what can I learn today? Even though it's just one point that I haven't heard before, I've gained something from that 30 minutes of presentation and what have you. And I've also learned that if I feel like I know everything, then my mind and my knowledge stays this small because I
Yeah.
can't know it all, right? A lot of people have different experience in life, so they learn other things. I might be stronger than them in one particular area, but they might be stronger than me in another particular area. And I use technology or social media as an example. I might be my kid's mother and I have a lot more life experience than they do. But when it comes to learning an app or technology or figuring things out, oh my God, I'm like way behind them. And I have to now be a little bit more modest with them and say, hey, mommy doesn't know how to do
Hey,
this.
I don't know how to
Can
do
you
this.
teach
Yeah.
me? Right? There's certain things I'm like, how do you do this? Can you teach me?
And that's important though, isn't it? Because I think modeling just that behavior and that humility to say, hey, listen, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have all the answers. Help me, right? And I think that's the other element of a growth mindset, which is I need help.
Asking for help. That's so
Asking
true.
for help.
Mhm.
And it is no shame to say that you don't know, number one. Number two, it is no shame to ask for help, right?
Yeah.
In the right context. At one level, I think it is a good thing to say, hey, listen, let's not overpraise our children.
Mhm.
I think that's
Everything is a
true.
fine balance. That's what I believe in.
It is a fine balance. And I think we both agree, on that. Some kids require more positive encouragement
Very true. Yeah.
than others.
Mhm.
It's our job as parents to figure out where that fine balance is, right? Are we giving too much? Are we not giving enough? And some
Mhm.
kids definitely need more. And if they don't get it, it will actually affect them the other way.
Yeah,
And
it's
you don't
very
want that
true.
either.
Yeah, the
Yeah?
confidence, you have to help them build their confidence too, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit of, hey, let's make sure that we don't overdo it either way. But in particular, let's just make sure that, as much as we can, let's reward the effort, encourage.
You mentioned your daughters a few times, and I'm curious, right? As somebody who already raised them to be adults themselves, and because you've been in this career your whole life, what kind of knowledge of your career have kind of trickled over to your personal life and raising their children? Because people always say hindsight is 2020, right? But from your professional career, you kind of had the hindsight of what's needed for them once they become adults and go into the real world. How have you raised them, or what kind of lessons did you teach them as they were growing up to kind of reach certain levels of their life?
one of the key things is not to take yourself too seriously and not think that you know all the
Good one.
answers. Every individual is different, and every circumstance is different. Might be right for one daughter is certainly not right for the other, because
Yes, very true.
they're actually both very different. They're very similar in many ways, but they're both very different. I think there are times when you say, hey, are you really sure you want to take that direction career-wise, right? Sometimes it may not necessarily be actively encourage them down one direction, as opposed to saying, hey, I'm not sure if you really want to do that one for these reasons.
Yeah.
Right. Because you tend to know them. You tend to know what the personalities are. You tend to know whether they're going to be happy in that particular situation. But very often, I think the principle, Vanessa, is really about what actually is going to make them happy. And that's where you switch
Love it. Love it. Yes.
from being the professional kind of career, coaching person to being a parent, where happiness is the single most important criterion, right? So,
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
happiness, when it comes to work, a lot of that actually stems from the values and culture of an organization. All right. Now, it so happens that because of the work that I was doing, I happen to know a little bit more about some companies. And so there are times when we suggested, I'm not sure if you really want to go to that organization because the values are not quite right. So maybe you want to avoid that. I think perhaps in some of these subtle ways, we try to be helpful.
Yes, it's just
as
asking
opposed to being
questions.
overly influential.
Yeah. I always say our role is really just to guide them with our experience and opinions. But I always encourage them to make their own decision. I always say, hey, mommy thinks this, and this, and consider this. But at the end, you make the decision.
Well, sometimes that's easier said than done, right? Because you know full well that, hey, this is the right way to go.
I know.
But,
I try, because I think one thing I've learned is making decision is also really important. Because sometimes I struggle with that myself. Every time I try to make a career change, I think about it. Sometimes I get into the rabbit hole of analysis paralysis. I just think too long and analyze. But at the fact, what I'm reading from a lot of leadership books is just making decisions quickly and learn from it. Either you learn the decision was wrong and abandon it, but take the lessons from it, or you move forward, because just sitting there and not knowing and thinking too long is a waste of time many times.
That's a useful way to think about it. I think there's a number of different ways of thinking about direction in career. One of them is what you've just said, which is, hey, just try a whole bunch of different things, see what you like, what you don't like. And sometimes you don't really know until you've tried it.
Exactly.
And so if you like, that is a design thinking influenced approach, meaning try a bunch of different things, right? There's a concept that says, especially with respect to early stage companies, if you need to fail fast. In other words, try a bunch.
I've heard that.
Things.
Yeah.
And so if that didn't work, hey, maybe I'll try something else. And then, if you then try enough things, then you'll know what you like, what you don't like, and use that as a guide. Now, I think that can be helpful, but I think along the way, it's also helpful to understand that personality comes into play. What does that mean? So for instance, right, let's just take the concept of extroversion versus introversion, right? Sometimes
you read my mind. I was going to go into that. I love it.
Hey, that person's an extrovert, right? Or that person's an introvert. And typically what that basically means is that if you say that somebody has a preference for extroversion, it basically means that you have an individual who actually takes a lot of energy or, gets energized from being with people. And so generally these people tend to be fairly sociable, they tend to be fairly gregarious and generally tend to talk a bit more than the introvert. And sometimes a lot more, right? And then you have folks on the other end of the scale where, an introvert would prefer quiet times, right? Prefer to read, to think, those quiet things in life. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you all spend your whole time on one side or the other side, right?
Yeah.
We flex up and down the scale, but generally you prefer one or the other. So for instance, what you generally find is that it's a little bit of a generalization, but it is generally true that if you think about, let's say, salespeople, right? Hey, salespeople, they're a bunch of extroverts. Well, typically that's actually true.
Yeah.
Why? It makes sense, right? Because if you have to interact with people all the time,
You'd be miserable.
you'll be miserable.
You're
If you're a
100%
really painful introvert, right? You have to be talking to people all the time. And you know what? I don't care to talk anymore, right?
Yeah.
So as you say, that's when it takes a lot of energy away from you. So therefore, there are certain factors in personality that actually do come into play. So for instance, if somebody who actually scores as a very strong introvert or has a very strong preference for introversion, you really want that guy to go out and try a bunch of, sales roles just to see that he doesn't like it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if there were a choice, I would say try something else, not the sales one.
Yeah.
So I think there's actually another way that you can narrow it down a little bit and make, even better choices in terms of what might be a good type of role to experience versus another, depending on what your personality is. There are psychometrics out there where you can use these online psychometric tests or assessments
Mm-hmm.
that give you a sense, right, of what your personality is. Now, one common psychometric is what is known as the MBTI. So the MBTI is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've taken that a few times.
You've taken that before, right? Do you remember what your type is?
I don't remember exactly, but I know throughout my career, it changed. As I moved from being a staff to being in a manager or a leading role, I've noticed that I've changed. That's all I remember. It's been many years, I think at least 8 to 10 years since I've taken the last one.
But we
I
do
noticed
change,
a
by the
change.
way.
Yeah.
We do change. And people change in life as they get older. But in your case, you might have shifted a little bit because of the role that
Mm-hmm.
you're in, and you found that you needed to respond with certain aspects of your personality. But in life, typically, let's say from when you're 30 to when you're 60, right? And I know that because, what happens later on in life is that you actually become more comfortable with yourself, and then you actually start to give yourself permission to experiment with to see what it's actually like on the other side. So
Mm-hmm.
for instance, I used to be somebody who would say, hey, I make all the decisions with facts and data. Well, okay. You know what? You do too much of that. You do what you talked about earlier, which is paralysis by analysis. So these days I'm thinking like, you know what? I'm going to go on this other side here, which is about feeling, right?
Yeah.
How do I make decisions that are based on the impact on people?
Mm-hmm.
How would that person feel? And what is the right principle to use in this case? All right. So just very quickly for your listeners, the Myers-Briggs is that tool that results in the 4 letters, right? So for instance, it could be an ENTJ or something else. And the first scale is the introversion versus extroversion, right? As we just talked about. The second scale is sensing versus intuition. And that's really about how you take in the world. You're taking the world through your senses. In other words, you see, you touch, you feel.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you don't really believe until you can see, touch, or feel, right?
You need proof.
Versus, right, the intuition folks who take in information through their head. So it's actually about ideas, right? So the difference between the two is that one is much more about, the facts, the details. And the other, on the intuition side, are the guys who are more ideas people, right? They're more conceptual, they're more abstract, thinkers. And that kind of reflects in the way that you like to do certain things or not.
So true.
The third scale is about how you make decisions. Do you make decisions with facts and data? In other words, your thinking type. Or do you make decisions with feelings? In other words, you kind of worry about people's feelings and reactions to certain things, right? So, for instance, if I'm your boss and I need to give you feedback, I might shy away from giving you what I think is tough feedback if I make that decision based on feelings. Oh, I better not say anything that is too hurtful to Vanessa, because then how would she feel? How would I feel if I was in that position?
So true.
The fourth is how you organize yourself. So are you somebody who will organize yourself so that you meet deadlines very easily, or as a matter of course, therefore judging? Or are you somebody who would keep things open for as long as possible, right? In other words, last minute. You've
A
seen
lot of
those
people
guys.
exist, yes.
So the combination, of these different factors kind of result in 16 personality types. Some people say, you don't put somebody in one bucket or another. Well, I think that's partly true, but generally speaking, the MBTI personality types do describe people fairly well,
Yeah,
right?
it does.
And I think you believe that. How that works with what sort of work you're going to be interested in or, find that you really enjoy, well, there's a connection between the two,
I believe
right?
that, yeah.
And if you end up doing something that you really, really, really don't enjoy, you know what? I'm not sure if that really does make sense,
Yeah.
because the last thing I think you want to do in career choice is to end up in a job that's really miserable.
Yeah, I know life's too short for that.
Life's too short for that, right?
Is there a particular way? I know I did it through the company when I was working, but is there like a particular website where people who are interested actually in taking this test that they can go
Yeah,
to?
so with MBTI, you just Google MBTI and there's a bunch of websites come up, and
Great.
many of them are actually free. They give you an idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one option. Check it out for the fun of it. Then, there are folks who certify in the MBTI, and then, you might go to these guys. They give you a next level of detail in terms of your MBTI profile, but it also teaches you the next level of detail, how you're likely to behave when you're under stress, for instance, right?
Ah, I remember that. Yes.
Right? What are some of the questions that you could ask so that you don't go into the rabbit hole with what it is that you would normally kind of think about in terms of your normal default approach,
Yeah.
right? So it kind of makes you think a little bit about expanding your sphere of impact and influence. And then, those folks that are certified, they might charge, I don't know, something like $300. But typically to get a MBTI test done, it's about $70, something like that.
Oh,
Right?
okay.
As opposed to the things that you can get for free, right? So it depends on stage of development. It depends on how serious you think you want to be about really deeply thinking about where you are in your career. But it also fundamentally depends on how unhappy you are right
Good
now
point. Right? It always
in your
helps
career.
to know yourself better. The other way to use this tool and the result is as a team, right? Whether you're in school or in your career, getting to know each other's type. Because when we did the analysis, we were a not so new team anymore, but we used to be like a brand new team at one point. And at the beginning was just survival, right? Sink or swim, just get the job done. But eventually my former boss was like, well, we could do some improvements, right, as a team. So we went through the test together and got the results of each other's types and kind of shared it as a group. We're like, no wonder you did this and this and this. Because I remember my direct boss at one point, he loves to analyze. Like if I go into his office and say, hey, this is the conclusion and that's it, I can't go anywhere. So learning and kind of confirming his personality type that he needs facts, I then changed my approach going forward, the way I work with him by saying, okay, he needs this. So let me give some supporting documents before I walk in so that it's easier for him to say yes to whatever I had to say.
That's very true. I think that's a really good example in terms of how you might apply knowledge of the MBTI. There are people who also need more time to think about things, right?
Yeah.
There are some people who are very good at kind of immediate responses and being very decisive in the moment. And there are people who need time. Typically, the I and the S, person who prefers introversion and the person who prefers sensing, other folks who need a little bit more time. So don't rush into the office and say, I need a decision now, because you're going to leave with no decision because they don't want to, right? Or you put so much stress on them, they freak out.
Yeah.
Right. And then you have other people who are more than happy to make fast decisions. And typically, these will be your E and N and T and probably J. The folks with a preference for judging are the people who generally can decide a little bit more quickly. The feeling types, before any decision is implemented, will say, but how is that going to affect our people?
Yeah. So
How would they feel about this, right? It's not that one is better than the other. And I think, the thing to think about personality types and Myers-Briggs in particular is that generally a diversity of views
Yes.
that come from a diversity of personality types should allow for you to make a better decision as a group overall.
Yeah.
And it also talks, therefore, to a little bit about diversity in terms of thinking.
I wanted to pivot a little bit just to ask you, because I know you have experience working across not just in North America, but also in Asia, Australia, and Europe. And some of the skill sets and soft skills we discussed earlier, do you think culturally or geographically has that been consistent worldwide, or do you see some nuances in different areas?
This is an interesting question. And if you asked me that maybe 10 years ago, I might have answered a little bit differently. Today, people are people. People are generally the same no matter where you go. Of course, they speak different languages.
Mhm.
Of course, some of the cultural norms are a little bit different. Of course, we understand that in Asia, it is a little bit more obviously hierarchical, where age is venerated and therefore more important. But having worked in the US, having worked in Europe, having worked in Asia, and a little bit in South America, and even a little bit in South Africa, the one thing that doesn't change about organizations is hierarchy. In other words, there is a power structure.
Yeah.
And it's there, right? Now, very often in North America, we kid ourselves a little bit to think that we're more democratic in the way that we run organizations than perhaps the Asians. That's actually not that true, in my opinion, because I think hierarchies, they all work in different ways.
Yeah.
Right. In the US, generally, maybe a little bit less outwardly obvious. In Europe, generally, you do need to be very careful about where you are in the pecking order and the extent to which you challenge authority.
Yeah.
In some US organizations, I think it is true that you do have the opportunity to challenge across authority levels a little bit more. But by and large, hierarchy is the order of the day. And certainly in Asia, it is, right? And especially if it's like the founder CEO, hey, you don't question his or her authority, right? And the common thing in terms of how people succeed, how aware somebody might be of what the power structure is.
Good point.
The thing about life and kind of working your way through organizations is, number one, to understand, know what you don't know. All right.
Such a good
Now,
point.
from there, I think it's about understanding, therefore, how best you influence the organization. So it's not just about what you know. And often it is about who you know. By and large, I think it's actually, again, it comes back to what we talked about earlier. It's about influencing.
I actually learned that who you know is a little bit more important than what you know, at least from my own personal life experience.
So it depends on the higher up you go,
Yeah,
the more
that's true.
that is true.
Yes.
All right.
Good point.
Now, when you're, at entry level and 3 to 5 years into your career, it's actually all about being proactive. It's all about, and it'd be interesting to see what your thoughts are on that. And it's been many years since I was an entry level guy. So things might have changed a little bit, but I think by and large, things have remained the same, right? So it's about put your best foot forward, be proactive, practice relationship building.
Yes.
From the word go, you start building your personal brand. And your personal brand could be, hey, that individual is a great problem solver, or that individual has tremendous work ethic, or that individual has a set of people skills that, you can count on them no matter what happens, they come to the rescue with whatever it is, right? So however, you build your personal brand is a good thing. Now, you don't do that, I think, at the expense of being technically competent in the work that you do. I mean, that's a given, right? But I think on top of that, once you kind of, start to understand what it is that you bring to the party that's a little bit different to everybody else, that's when, you kind of consolidate your personal brand. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yes. I actually love that you brought up building your personal brand. And I think it's so important because you view yourself from a very particular perspective. I know you probably think you know yourself best, but sometimes what I've learned in life is it's the perception of other people of you
Absolutely.
that matters more than who you are. So you might have certain intentions of doing certain things, but the way it's perceived might be completely opposite. And that's the brand you're building, which is a bit outside of your control. So you need to be aware of what your brand is. And one of the suggestions I always made is, and I love that we sometimes, not often enough though, do 360 reviews, because normally in an organization, you only get review from your boss, your immediate boss, and that's it. But no matter what stage you're in life, actually, it's really important to understand your peers, people you work with, and also if you have some direct reports, maybe not for our listeners as much, but It could be you are the president of your, college or high school organization, right? You can still get an idea from people who work with you in your organization, what they think about you. So going out and proactively ask, hey, what am I known for? When people think of me, what are the 2-3 words that come to mind? It's so important because when I did my first one, it was eye-opening, actually.
This is an important discussion, right? From a number of respects. I think firstly, to reinforce what you just said, to get an idea as to how you're actually being perceived is really important. You might think you're doing a great job, right?
Exactly, but
People
sometimes
think
you're
that I'm
not.
hugely confident, but people say, "Oh man, she's not that reliable."
Yep.
So I think to get a sanity check, right,
Yeah.
is an important thing. So the question is, how do you do that, right? Now, I think this has to do with developing a network. Think of it as supporting network, right? Who are the people that you can talk to? Now, it could be somebody more senior to you. It could be a peer, and it could be a direct report, right? Or somebody, at the next level. But I think this speaks to the question of how do you enlist people to help you in your career almost from day one.
Mm-hmm.
You need at least 2 things to be able to do this. Number one, you need to be able to ask for help and be willing to
Yes,
ask for
right.
help.
To what you said earlier,
And
ask for
right,
help.
and put pride away and say, I need your help.
Just before we go,
Mm.
how can our listeners learn more about you and your company? Is there a particular website they could go to?
Oh, yeah, sure,
Somewhere?
absolutely.
Where can they find you?
Absolutely. Well, firstly, look at my LinkedIn profile, right? Terry Chuah, Chuah. On my LinkedIn profile, there are a whole bunch of different posts that I've kind of done over time. And some of them are kind of useful ideas, like this concept of ikigai, which is about that time in your life, if you're lucky enough to find a job that you're really good at,
Mm-hmm.
a job that you love,
Oh my God, yes.
right? A job where you're making a difference to the world. And not only that, a job that pays you well. Now, if you can have 4 of these things,
Great, I'll take it all.
you take it all, right? So the Japanese have a name for that. They call that ikigai, right? So one of the things that I talk about is the concept of career ikigai, where as much as we can, if we can move in that direction, and if we get anywhere near being in the intersection of these 4 things, we're almost by definition should be happy. And if we're not, there's some other problem,
Yeah.
right?
Going back to
So
French,
we can get there. So you'll see some of that in my post. Go to my website, www.thecareerlifecycle.com. You'll see some of the other ideas that I've kind of posted.
Yeah, I'm going to go read some
Anybody wants to talk, just give me a call.
Okay. Now, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, Terry. I really appreciate you coming
It's my
and sharing
pleasure,
your knowledge.
Vanessa, and keep going with the good work that you're doing.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye.
Hey, take care. We'll talk again soon.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
So, have you had a chance to take some notes? What was your favorite lesson that Terry shared with us today? And have you also thought about what you will try to implement into your life? I know it can be very confusing as you prepare for the life ahead of you, but we hope that we're able to guide you and provide you with some support with the lessons that we learned. And just remember, check out Terry's website and LinkedIn profile to learn more valuable lessons about your career and how you can prepare for it. And of course, visit firstmentorstreet.com and subscribe to the First Mentor podcast for many other thought-provoking topics. And we'll talk to you in the next episode. Have a great day.